When I accidentally broke the garden shears, it instantly flashed through my mind that I wouldn't be able to finish trimming the hedge without them. They were a high-quality tool that Adam must have specially ordered from overseas. The price was clearly beyond what I was used to spending on work-related expenses. And now, looking at the damage, I knew I couldn't avoid talking to Adam. I felt my stomach clench. Adam had been my employer for over 3 years, and every day I could see that he was used to total control and high standards. Not only was he influential, but he had an iron grip that always made it clear that in his house, everything had to be done his way. So, putting down my tools and taking a deep breath, I headed into the house, determined to explain myself and offer to buy a new pair of scissors at my own expense if necessary. As I passed the tall windows, I noticed his figure in the office. Adam was sitting at the table and looking through some papers, completely immersed in the matter. I walked up the steps, knocked on the half-open door of the office, and a little nervously peered inside. Adam, seeing me, looked up from his papers and motioned for me to come in. His gaze was calm but intent, as always, as if he could instantly assess your every move without even saying a word. "How can I help you?" he said, in an even voice, showing neither irritation nor particular interest. Mr. Adam, sorry to bother you, I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. "I need to tell you that I accidentally broke my garden shears. I understand that they are expensive, and I am prepared to buy new ones at my own expense if necessary." Adam looked at me with a faint smile, and there was something in his gaze that immediately made me feel as if he knew about my problem, even before I voiced it. It was as if he had already decided that I had been careless, and therefore deserved a lesson. "Ah, the scissors," he drawled. "Well, Lincoln, that was a quality tool, as you can imagine." "Yes, I understand, Mr. Adam, and I am willing to pay for new ones," I replied, feeling a slight tension growing inside me. I sincerely wanted to resolve the situation, but Adam's gaze became increasingly thoughtful, and there was something elusive in it, as if he was considering his words with particular care. "You know, Lincoln, I could just order a new pair of scissors," he said slowly, leaning forward. "But don't you think a simple apology for something like that is not enough? After all, it's not just about money, it's about attention to work, about my property." His words sounded strange, like I was trapped, unable to simply leave. Adam was clearly toying with me, and his tone left no doubt that he was enjoying watching me lose my nerve. For the first time, I realized that my freedom of choice might be at risk in this house, and it made my insides go cold. "Listen, Lincoln," Adam said, leaning in a little closer. His voice was calm, but there was a hardness to it that made every word seem more important. "I know you might think a simple apology is enough, but I don't think so." I froze, unsure of what to expect from this conversation. It all seemed so ridiculous, but seeing how Adam was watching me intently, I knew he wasn't going to let me go that easily. His eyes studied me with such interest, as if he knew I wouldn't resist and would agree to whatever he offered to keep my job. "What if I offered you a special deal?" Adam raised an eyebrow and his voice suddenly became softer, but it didn't bring relief. On the contrary, it made me even more uneasy. "What deal?" I blurted out. I knew it was probably the wrong question, but there was only one thought pulsing through my head. "Keep my job for my family." "It's simple," he replied, and a slight, barely noticeable smile appeared on his face. "You just need to demonstrate your willingness to make corrections. Prove that you don't want the incident to affect your reputation or your job." I looked at him, not believing my ears. I knew there was more to his words than simple forgiveness, but I couldn't yet comprehend how far it could go. My confusion seemed to please him, and Adam, catching my confused look, continued. "All I want, Lincoln, is a small show of loyalty from you. After all, you work for me, and your career as well as the well-being of your family depend on it." He paused, letting his words settle in the quiet of the room, as if testing my reaction to this proposal. A conflict flared up inside me. I knew my job, my income, my whole life depended on it. But Adam's demand felt like a violation of my personal boundaries. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Adam?" I whispered, feeling every nerve on edge. Adam stood up and walked around the table, approaching me. His gaze remained steady and calm, and he kept looking at me, as if anticipating my reaction. I felt trapped, but I couldn't look away. He stopped a step away and finally said, "I want you to show that you care about my opinion. Come closer, Lincoln." I froze, as if my legs had stopped obeying me. My heart was pounding, and looking into his eyes, I realized that there was no joke here. His gaze, commanding and calm, did not give me a chance to reject this move. I knew that refusal would mean losing my job and possibly serious difficulties in the future. My body seemed to go against my mind as I took a step forward, accepting his terms. He moved closer to me, and his hand rested on my shoulder. The touch was unexpected and unfamiliar, but I stood still, suppressing the tension inside me. I knew I would probably regret this later, but at that moment, the fear of losing my job and the stability of my family was stronger. I let him control the situation, feeling like I was in someone else's body. Adam bowed his head slightly, and before I could say anything, his lips were on mine. It wasn't what I expected, but I barely had time to process what was happening before he pulled away for a moment, looking into my eyes again. His face was nothing but confidence, and despite my embarrassment, I couldn't deny his gaze. That kiss, that moment, seemed to change something inside me, and I felt like I couldn't just leave that office anymore. I knew that this was only the first step, and that Adam intended to go further until I agreed to his terms in full. I stood before him, feeling the tension inside me give way to a strange weariness. The kiss continued to pulse in my memory, as if it were not an accident, but something important that demanded a response. But what could I do? Refuse, forget about it, and try to leave? I felt that Adam would not allow me to simply break this moment and forget everything, as if nothing had happened. I took a step back, but his gaze held me, as if he already knew I would try to pull away. He came closer again, and I felt my resolve weaken. There was a challenge in his eyes, a cold certainty, and I knew this conversation would not be easy. Despite my resistance, I knew I couldn't just walk away without an explanation. "You think you can just walk away?" he asked softly, as if it was a simple question, though there was an insistent certainty in his voice. "Do you still want to refuse what I'm offering?" I don't know," I answered, feeling something like protest flare up inside me, but not having the strength to express it openly. His confidence, his steadfastness, his attractiveness, all of it made me feel confused, as if I wasn't prepared for this turn of events. Adam came closer again and without taking his eyes off me said, "You can still choose, Lincoln, but think about what I'm offering you. You have nothing to lose. I, on the contrary, can offer you support and stability which, believe me, is not easy to find in this world." His words almost sounded reasonable, but I knew they were a trap. He knew I needed this offer. I depended on this job, on the income that supported my family. I hated myself for considering his words, but something inside me was changing. He raised his hand and gently touched my shoulder. The gesture was gentle, almost comforting, but it reminded me that I was standing before a man who was willing to cross boundaries. I was afraid, but at the same time, I felt a strange excitement. I wanted to leave, to break free, but something inside me seemed to resist, as if I was submitting not only to his will, but to my own desire to stay here. Adam came even closer to me, his gaze full of confidence, and I knew that he knew about all my thoughts, about all the contradictions. I froze, and he, without looking away, quietly said, "Lincoln, believe me, this is not a game. I really need you, and if you allow yourself to trust me, you will see that I will not betray your expectations." His words broke through my last barriers, and I felt that a little more, and I would give in, let him take control of the situation. I spent the entire night after that conversation awake, trying to figure out what had really happened. I remembered how Adam had never looked away from me when he spoke of his need for my devotion, how his words had penetrated deep, leaving a strange sense of inevitability. I tried to convince myself that I could forget all of this, but I knew it was a lie. The thought of his touch, of his commanding manner in front of me, haunted me. By morning I was broken, but my resolve to return to the house was firm. I knew that there was a connection between us that defied easy explanation. As I entered the office, I saw his calm, confident face again, and I realized that his presence was strangely attractive to me. Adam, noticing me, nodded slightly, and I felt how this simple gesture brought me back to the very moment when I realized that I did not want to break this connection. He came towards me again, and I knew that this time I wouldn't resist. Adam took his time, letting me make the first move, as if he understood that this freedom of choice was important to me. My heart was beating faster than ever, but this time I decided not to hide behind a wall of caution. I took a deep breath and, feeling the tension rising in my throat, I raised my hand and touched his. The gesture was simple, but it meant so much more than words. I knew that by allowing myself to do this, I had accepted his terms and was ready for what came next. Adam smiled slightly, and in his eyes I saw approval mixed with something warmer than his usual reserve. He leaned closer, and I felt his hand settle on my shoulder, moving smoothly to my neck. My feelings were a whirlwind: fear, surprise, but most of all, a surprising ease, as if I had finally stopped being afraid of what might happen between us. His touch was confident and gentle, and I realized that my body itself responded, no longer resisting, but giving in to his movements. Each of his touches was calm, almost gentle, and I felt like I didn't want to interrupt this moment. Adam clearly noticed my confusion, but there was no condemnation in his gaze, only understanding. He moved even closer, and this time our kisses were no longer a demand, but a real confession. I felt my hand fall on his shoulder, and for the first time I realized that I no longer wanted to resist. His lips touched mine, and this time I responded, forgetting everything that had held me back. It was different. It was not an act of submission, but something more sincere. My thoughts seemed to blur, leaving only feelings, pure and clear. I no longer tried to push him away or find a way out of the situation. Instead, I finally accepted it, letting the feelings wash over me, and I felt a strange inner peace. His hand fell lightly on my waist, and the gesture no longer confused me. I looked at him without looking away, and felt the last barriers between us finally disappear. He looked at my face carefully, as if he wanted to make sure that I truly accepted him. I nodded without saying a word, but knowing that he didn't need to hear anything else. He understood everything. There was more between us now than just physical intimacy. I could see it in his eyes, in the softness of his movements, in the way his arms held me securely, not allowing me to leave or pull away. Adam pulled me closer, and I felt his warmth soothing me, as if nothing else existed. Our breaths mingled, and I knew I was here because I wanted to be. In the quiet of the room, I heard Adam whisper my name, and that small, barely audible sound made me feel like something important was happening between us. His voice was deep, calm, and I knew this moment was just as meaningful for him. I touched his face lightly, as if to check that this was really happening, and saw his gaze soften. "Lincoln," he said, and I realized that there was no hint of his former harshness in his words. He was no longer a domineering, unapproachable master, but a man who genuinely wanted me to be near. I allowed myself to smile and nod, feeling that our silent agreement was stronger than any words. This moment was something real for both of us, and I finally allowed myself to enjoy it, forgetting everything. We stood there in silence, and I felt like there was no need for any control, either from him or from me. We were just people, free of any masks, and this moment felt the most honest I'd felt in a long time. Adam, without breaking eye contact, gave my hand a gentle squeeze as if to confirm that his desire to stay close was as strong as mine. I knew that we had both chosen this path and that now I no longer had to think about the consequences. All that mattered was that I had accepted him and he had accepted me. We were together in this decision, and I knew that I was ready to trust him and this feeling. There were no more doubts, only the realization that our communication, like this moment, had gone beyond the usual relationship. Now I felt calm, confident, and knew that a connection had been established between us that could never be broken. It had been a week since I had allowed myself to admit that there was more to the relationship between Adam and me than just tension. And while it had felt strange and foreign at first, with each passing day, I found myself drawn to him, as surprising as it might sound. His presence no longer frightened me or made me nervous. On the contrary, I found a certain comfort in it, a sense that I had someone I could trust. I found myself wanting to see him more and more often, wanting to be close to him and share moments with him that I would have previously considered too personal. Adam seemed to sense this, and his approach to me changed too. Now, there was not only the usual confidence in his gaze, but also genuine interest. He was no longer playing with my confusion, not trying to suppress me. On the contrary, he was giving me time to get used to the fact that we were part of a single connection that was beginning to become important to both of us. One evening, as we sat in his office, I caught his eye and smiled, feeling for the first time truly glad to be there. "You're changing, Lincoln," Adam said quietly, looking at me carefully. I caught a note of surprise and approval in his voice. I wouldn't have believed before that I could care about his opinion, but now I felt something akin to joy. We both knew that our connection went beyond a simple working relationship, and I was glad that Adam noticed it. "Perhaps," I replied, trying not to show my emotions, but knowing that he had seen everything. "It's entirely possible that I should thank you for this." Adam smiled, and it was different than before, without irony, without tension. He reached out, lightly touching my shoulder, and the touch brought an unexpected feeling of warmth to me. There was no control or pressure in his gestures now. They were soft, filled with respect, and perhaps something more than just physical attraction. I touched his hand in response, and this simple closeness became something meaningful for both of us. We sat in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. The feeling of silence around him, when words were no longer necessary, felt strangely right. I no longer had to constantly strain myself not to show my true feelings. Everything happened on its own, naturally. I felt the trust between us strengthen, and it filled me with a confidence I had never known before. Adam leaned slightly toward me, and before I could say anything, his hand rested lightly on mine. I looked at him, and there was a warmth in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. In that moment, I knew there was something more than just an employer-employee bond between us. It was something personal, something that resembled real affection, and for the first time, I felt like I didn't have to be afraid of it. Without thinking, I squeezed his hand, letting him know that I was ready to be there, and that our closeness no longer felt wrong or dangerous to me. Adam looked up, and I saw a flicker of surprise and satisfaction in his eyes. He didn't seem to expect such a gesture from me, but instead, I saw his gaze soften and his hand tighten around mine. In that moment, I realized that this connection was more important to both of us than we could have imagined. It was the first time I felt like I could truly trust him. "You have no idea how important this is to me, Lincoln," he said quietly. I caught a note of sincerity in his words that made me feel warm inside. His voice was soft and warm, and I knew that there was a connection between us now that could not be broken so easily. I looked back at him, letting him know that I was ready to be there. We sat next to each other, and every moment of that evening was remembered as something special, as something that would leave its mark forever. The next day, I came to work feeling like there was more between us now than just work duties. I didn't know how to explain it, but I felt like Adam and I had become truly close. It was hard to imagine that just a few weeks ago, I couldn't have imagined how different I would be around him. When we met again, he smiled as usual, but now there was no trace of mockery in his smile, It was the smile of a man who appreciates another. We exchanged glances, and I knew that he, too, did not need to explain anything. Our feelings had become obvious to both of us. I felt that I did not need to hide, did not need to prove anything. I was accepted as I was, and this feeling was new and encouraging. Now I understood that our connection was based on honesty, and I was grateful that this man standing in front of me was also honest with me. We were back in his office, and this time I felt at home. His hand, as usual, lightly touched mine, and without a moment's hesitation, I responded to this touch, sensing that there was something more to it than just a gesture. It was a sign of trust, of mutual understanding, and in that moment, I knew that this was no accident. Adam slowly pulled me towards him, and I, feeling a warm calm, responded to his kiss, which was no longer forced or unexpected. This was our own world, where everything happened honestly, where we could be ourselves. And in that moment, I realized that I did not want to lose this man anymore, and that my life had changed because of him. I walked into his office with my usual confidence, but he seemed to be expecting me, as if this conversation was as important to him as it was to me. Mornings in his house were always quiet and calm, but today there was a new feeling in the air. I saw him nod at me, inviting me to sit across from him, and for the first time I felt that this moment would be something meaningful for us. "Lincoln, I ordered new scissors for your work," he said, smiling slightly. There was no hint of accusation in his voice, only warm, quiet respect. "I think you'll like them." I nodded slightly, feeling strangely excited. This simple decision to replace a tool seemed mundane, but I knew there was more to it. He made me feel like I was part of his life, his environment, and in that moment, I knew we were more than just worker and master. Our connection was undeniable now, and it warmed my heart. "Thank you," I replied, meeting his gaze, which now held more than just business-like friendliness. I saw warmth and acceptance in his eyes, as if this conversation was important to him too. "And for everything else," I added, not wanting to hide my gratitude. Adam frowned slightly, but his smile remained genuine. He leaned forward and said quietly, "Lincoln, I realized long ago that life gives us people who can change us. I've achieved a lot, but this is something else. Your honesty, your calm, all of this filled me with something new." I felt my cheeks turn slightly pink and looked down. His words meant more to me than I could express. It was an acknowledgement I hadn't expected, but one that would forever remain a part of my perception. I sensed that it wasn't just gratitude, but something much more meaningful. Adam reached out his hand again, and I took it easily. This touch, like everything between us, had become familiar to me, but now I knew it meant more than just closeness. We were silent, allowing each moment to fill us with a silence and understanding that was stronger than any words. We both knew that this was a moment of farewell to old forms of relationships and an acceptance of something new, something profound. "You do realize you can come back anytime, Lincoln?" he said quietly with a slight grin, his voice not so much a request as hope. I nodded, feeling like I no longer needed any explanation. Inside, I felt like this invitation was more than just a job offer. It was a promise that our connection would continue, no matter how our lives turned out. I knew this moment would be a starting point for new things to come, and I felt at peace with that. "I'll be glad to come back," I said, not taking my eyes off him. I saw genuine joy in his eyes, and that was what mattered most. We both knew that these weren't just words, but a promise that we would now be a part of each other's lives. He squeezed my hand gently, and there was something warm and supportive in the gesture. I felt his fingers lightly caressing my hand, and this gesture became for both of us a sign of a new stage, free from all formalities. Now I knew that I could trust him not only with my work, but also with my thoughts, my experiences, everything that had previously been part of only me. "Lincoln," he said quietly, using my name again as if it were something important. Remember, I'll always be here. To me, this isn't just a job. His words were serious and deep, and I felt them leave an imprint on me. It was a promise that no matter the distance, our connection would remain. We spent the rest of the day barely speaking to each other. It was as if words were no longer necessary. Our connection had become strong and self-sufficient, and I felt like every moment spent with him was filled with meaning. I was no longer afraid of my feelings, knowing that I had someone who understood me. That evening, as I was leaving, Adam came up to me and, without saying a word, hugged me. It was a simple, quiet gesture, but I felt everything he wanted to express in it. I returned his embrace, feeling a calm and warmth fill my insides. We both knew that this connection would always be there, no matter where we ended up or what decisions we made. He pulled away and looked at me again with a soft smile, and I realized that this farewell was not the end, but the beginning. He knew that we would meet again, that there was something left unsaid between us that only strengthened our bond. As I walked out of the house and closed the door behind me, I was left with a sense of peace and warm gratitude. It had been a short time since I had worked for him, but my life had changed dramatically. I no longer had just an employer, but someone who understood me and was willing to support me. I knew that Adam was the man who had shown me that life could be deeper and more fulfilling than I had ever imagined. As I walked along the garden path, I looked back at the house where our journey had begun, and I felt that now, no matter what my path, I would always have a place to return to. We had made a promise to each other, quiet, casual, but real. And now I could move on, knowing that this house, this man, would remain an important part of my life.